It's a beautiful but warm day here in Southern Oregon, and I found it necessary to do this. I'm going to make it pretty short. I hope anyone watching will like and subscribe. That's something I'm supposed to say, although not very many people do it. And please, even if you don't watch this whole video, go to some of the links that are much more seen and popular and factual in the description. I'm going to add it when I get home, because it's important that we find true information, and it's not true that we cannot know the truth of any given thing. Usually, especially with the blessing of the internet, we have to search, do a little looking, look at various sources, and then our common sense, our inner light, will show us what makes sense and what is true. If we don't know, then we just don't know. That's, fine. But to say that we can't know, like on this subject of the good and evil war between Russia and Ukraine, that's an excuse for weakness. And people have a problem of just associating with a popular or a party-driven view and just going along with that, because in their soul they're cowardly and by nature, and as Roy Masters said, and no, that's not an insult, it's the truth, but as Roy Masters said, the only problem that humans really have is that they lack courage, and that is so true. So I'm doing this to encourage people to have courage and come out. I was a coward for a lot of my life, so I'm not like looking down on anybody or self-righteous as I've been accused of being. Quite the opposite, thank God. I've come through a lot of suffering, and I've lived in a deep depression hell for, I don't know, like 6 years, midlife crisis, and I didn't even know if I would ever come out, and I did. Thank God, and my persistence, which He gave me. So if you look at a little bit of the history of Putin, and I've done plenty of research, it's researchable. I have a book, and I'm going to put it in the link also when I get back, about the history of Putin, that was done by a journalist who had the courage to even confront him face to face, which is putting his life in danger, called Killer in the Kremlin. Putin, Boris Yeltsin stated on his deathbed, or just before his death, that the greatest mistake he ever did in his life was to hand over power to Putin. And that was so right, because Putin was bred and formed KGB. Now they call it FSB. It's the same thing. And yes, Russia is still basically communist, although they do allow free enterprise businesses, but they own a lot, if not all, of the major industries. And that's how the oligarchs, and they run it like a mafia state. There's a lot of info that can be seen about that. A mafia nation, and they siphon off money from these businesses and corporations, and Putin's oligarchs run them. And that's how he's become extremely wealthy. He's a billionaire. Extremely wealthy by stealing the money from the Russian people, rather than helping them and helping their economy to grow and to be free, more like a Western European economy. But no, they're never been interested in that. And they put ruses, they have whole propaganda farms, and I'm going to put a link of a expose about that. Whole big propaganda farms to, they go into conservative forums and stuff, and they act like they're, they propose lies about what their real nature is and what they're doing with Ukraine. And one of them is that, they went in to save the Russian people in Crimea. No, they didn't actually. They went in right after the Maidan Revolution, which was millions of people. Of course, the United States was happy with that, because it would align, Ukraine more with freedom, Western Europe and United States. Of course, that's logical. Morning. But the reality is, if you look at the Maidan protests and then what Putin sent sniper thugs to start murdering some of the protesters, try and intimidate them, didn't work. And they came out by the millions. And to deny the real reason that happened is to call Ukrainians liars, because they did come out and were very outraged that Yanukovych had a meeting with Putin and betrayed them as they were going to sign a trade agreement with Europe, and that's what they wanted. They wanted more alignment with free economies in Europe. He promised that, and then he met with Putin, and Putin intimidated him, and he backed out. Then they had to protest. Then after the protests, you can see there's GPS coordinates of Russian troops going into Crimea right after the Maidan, because Putin felt like now, that might be their bases, their naval ports and stuff might be, in question. So he went and grabbed and stole another nation. That's just what he did. And then I read a book about the Donbass. They had different peace, kind of peace treaties, and where they all stopped fighting, but the Russians wouldn't abide. They kept on bombing, over the border, and a lot of civilians got killed. And I'm sure on the other side, some civilians got killed by the Ukrainians too, as they were trying to defend themselves from the aggression from the Russians. They went in there hidden, like trying to hide, and it was like, it's so well known. They tried to hide like they weren't Russian troops. They were, obviously. And they went, and aligned themselves with the Russians who were, trying to take over Donbass. And they, and Putin, lied and said, well, it's not us, we're not involved. And then 2 months later, he signed, papers, documents in Russia that they own Crimea now. So it was all a ruse, a lie. The thing about Putin is he's a liar from the beginning. He lies about everything. The man is demon possessed. Like, there's some people that are there's this famous Catholic, he was an exorcist and he passed away. There are some people that are simply he called it perfectly possessed, and that's what Putin is. Everything he says, almost, even if it's laced with truth, is a lie. And to take information from him and propagate it to people is insane. It's so foolish when it can be found out. And what they did was, Putin and his thugs, they took over Chechnya. I've read news reports, people that were there. There's a famous Russian journalist who Putin had murdered, as they've murdered something like 50 journalists. Anyone who exposes him and their evil deeds gets murdered. Eventually, over there. That's easy to find out. So she was there in Chechnya. You can read reports where the Chechen townspeople from various towns would flee the towns because they didn't want to be murdered by the Russian troops. And a lot of them, they carried white flags too. And the attack helicopter still bombed them, still murdered them. These are families, women, children. This is a known thing. So that's what they did in Chechnya. Then they rolled over Georgia. They stole Georgia. They murdered plenty of civilians doing that. They got involved in Syria, gas bombed Syrians, used chemical weapons, murdered a lot of civilians there. Then, of course, we know about Crimea. They went in there. It was fairly bloodless because, of course, that's right next to the border, and they wanted to own it and have it for their, naval port and etc. So it's a continuing aggression against nations, against innocent civilians. It's the way the Russians have always fought, and now from Crimea they've moved on to Ukraine. But the difference with Ukraine is, obviously, they've said hell no, and they're capable and amazingly brave, and they've put a halt to this aggression. If you don't stop a bully and an aggressor, like this is a massive bully, they just keep on rolling. So Ukraine is doing a fabulous job for the world by decimating the Russian economy. You got oil tanks and oil manufacturing facilities burning all over Russia. And if you look at the difference between the way the Russians fight this war and the Ukrainians, and I'm going to put a link also to this, the Russians murder, and they've done it since World War II. It was horrendous what the communists did as they rolled through Europe. Horrendous. I mean, I'm not even going to repeat what they did to women and stuff. And General Patton knew that they would be our arch enemies, and we should have rolled right into them and stopped them. But of course, that was not to be. And so what they're doing now is akin to all that. And a lot of people, especially on the right, have been influenced by these propaganda farms and the lies of Putin, and then they repeat it. And some of it has a little bit of truth. Yeah, there's Nazis in Ukraine. There's Nazis, a lot of Nazis actually in Russia. But it's not it's not really a problem in Ukraine. They've dealt with it. The vast majority of people reject it. They have no power. They're not in their parliament. So that was another lie that the liar, the civilian mass murdering liar, propagated to motivate his troops to slaughter innocent people and to feel like they were doing the right thing. Evil psychopaths always have to present a thing to judge and to believe of an evil that is being fought. And that's what they do. They just lie in order to justify their aggression. And Trump has done it too. Trump has done it with all these illegal immigrants, saying that they're going to go after the worst of the worst when they're going after people who are, here working hard and trying to get their papers. And even like just the other day, I saw they arrested this man at the school when he was picking up his kids. The kids had to get picked up by someone else. And so now they're taking the breadwinner, or trying to take the breadwinner from the family when they're not the worst of the worst. So that's what Trump has done. They've got like billions of dollars to do that all over the nation. They're being aggressive. They're breaking the Constitution by doing search and seizure without a warrant. Psychopaths, that this is what they do. And to believe their lies is so weak. It's just so weak. You have to see through it. And it's very, I'm so grateful for the Ukrainians now that they're winning, because I've heard it proposed by many and Trump, that we just want the war to end. We want killing to end. Putin doesn't want that. He wants all of Ukraine, and he won't even do a ceasefire to negotiate. He's not interested in that because he's a psychopathic civilian mass murderer. And there's no negotiating with someone like that. You have to win. So the war will stop when enough force and power is wielded against them. And that's what's starting to happen. Way beyond starting. So when Russia economy fails and they have no gas and they can't deliver food, that's when the people there may rebel, or Putin will finally throw up his hands. That's the only effective way. Otherwise, the only way to stop and to end the war, like some people have said, we just want the war to end, is to capitulate and give in to slavery. Give in to the thuggery, and that's really bad for freedom across the whole world, because whenever you give in to aggression like that, it wants more. That's just a known fact. That's the way evil works. It always has. It always has. You look at World War II, and it's folly, it's weakness to want the war to end without winning by a strong defense. And now they have to be offensive. But if you really see, and I've been told that, Ukrainians kill civilians too. No, if you follow Ukrainian channels, U.S. veteran channels on the actual war footage, Ukrainians do their utmost to avoid civilian killing, and they're taking apart the Russian economy now. But if you look at the Russians since the beginning, as I've described, they've purposely bombed civilians. They just blew up, several apartments. Part of them murdered like 30 Ukrainians on purpose. On purpose. It's terrorism. This is not even war the way the Russians are fighting. It's brutal tyranny, and it didn't work when they firebombed London because the English people were noble and they were not going to give up their freedom to a tyrant. So they killed like 30,000 civilians in the London firebombing, the Luftwaffe. But look what happened. Look what happened. We won, and it's going to be the same thing, please God, against this insanity. This evil aggression, bombing civilians, human safaris on purpose to try to intimidate and get them to give up. But they're not cowards. They know what's in store for them too if they do give up. All the people that fought, all their industry and stuff will be, or most of it, or maybe all of it, will be taken over by the Russians. I had a friend in Crimea who I was conversing with. When they took over that, she was working for a business, and she was disgusted to see the owner flee after the business was taken over by the Russians. They just stole the business. They just went in there and they just steal people's businesses, their livelihood. They steal them. That's what's in store. I mean, do people really want the Ukrainians to submit to that? This is the 4th of July. Where's the spirit of fight and freedom? My God. All of this listening to Russian propaganda, which some of it may be laced with a little bit of truth, yes, but to look at it and say, not stand with Ukraine boldly and strongly and with passion that your inner light gives you, and to listen to your mind come up, and it's demons through the mind, come up with excuses why we shouldn't be standing with Ukraine, is very, very dumb. And if you want to come out of those doubts and thoughts and live by the inner light, please go to the Roy Masters Be Still exercise, because you can just do that, excuse and listen to all those excuses why you shouldn't obviously stand with these bold defenders of their freedom. But it's pathetic. All right, God bless you. Take care.